Hey everybody, welcome to another lesson of learning Japanese. Today we are continuing where we left off on a previous video, or not a previous video, but literally the most recent video. And in that video we learned how to compare two different entities. Now we have to go further, and now we have to learn how to compare more than two different entities. So when we're comparing two different entities, we always use the same phrase. We use the phrase dochira no ho, and that is basically saying which one. Well, when we're comparing more than two different entities, 3, 4, 5, or whatever, we have to take into consideration the nature of the things being compared, as in, are they people, are they places, are they just things or tools or whatever. Well, whatever the case is, the word that we're going to use to describe all of them conjunctively is going to be different. So now that we can't rely on the phrase dochira no ho, we are going to use a different grammar construct, and that grammar construct is X to Y to Z to de wa blank ga ichiban A desu ka. And here the blank in this represents what we are supposed to use depending on what we're comparing. So how do we know which word to use? Well, here's the basic rundown. If we're talking about people here and we're kind of being casual and plain, we are going to use the word dore. And if we're not being plain or casual, as in we're being pretty polite, we're going to use donata. If we're talking about places, then we're going to use the word doko. And if it isn't a people or a place, usually the word that we rely on is dore, which is used for just things in general. Dore or donata for people, doko for places, and dore for pretty much the rest. Okay, so now let's just move into the examples to get a better idea of this. MMORPG to FPS to MOBA to de wa dore ga ichiban tanoshii desu ka? So what is this sentence saying? It is saying among MMORPG games, FPS games, and MOBA games, which is the most fun. You can see that while a few words have changed, this is pretty much the same format as we used in the last video when we were comparing two entities. Again, here we start off with listing the entities themselves, followed by the particle to. So we see FPS to, MMORPG to, MOBA to. After we list all the entities, we use the de wa phrase, and this is basically just saying among these things that I just listed. After that, we have the respective question word that we're supposed to use based on the entities that we're comparing, and here we're comparing types of games, so we're just going to use dore because that is the more general one. Right after that, we have the particle ga to denote that as the subject. Right after ga, we have ichiban, which means the most or the best or the number one. After that, we have the adjective tanoshii, which we've seen before. It's an e adjective. It means fun. So if we read that together with ichiban, ichiban tanoshii means the most fun. And then to end it all, we have desuka, which is just des plus the particle ka to make this into a question. So all together, MMORPG to FPS to MOBA to de wa dore ga ichiban tanoshii desu ka is among MMORPG games, FPS games, and MOBA games, which one is the most fun? For our next example, we're going to compare three entities that are, quote, people, unquote. For our sentence, we have Kami sama to Godzilla sama to Kaname Madoka sama to de wa donata ga ichiban suki desu ka? And here we are asking among God, Godzilla, and Kaname Madoka, which person do you like most? So this is pretty much the same format as the previous one. We've just simply replaced dore with donata because we're comparing people now, and also because we're uttering these people's names with respect, we're going to be polite and we're going to use donata instead of dore. So let's just do a little breakdown of the sentence anyways. We have Kami-sama to Godzilla sama to Kaname Madoka sama to. We're listing all of the people. So we have God, Godzilla, and Kaname Madoka. After we've listed them all, we have the phrase again, de wa, to be among these. After that, we have donata, which means who in the respectful, polite sense. We have the particle ga, which is the subject marker. After that, we have ichiban suki, which means liked most. Then we have desuka to end the sentence and make it into a question. So again, all together, Kami-sama to Godzilla sama to Kaname Madoka sama to de wa donata ga ichiban suki desu ka? So for our next example sentence, we're now going to compare places. Our example sentence is New York to Paris to Tokyo to de wa doko ga ichiban kirei desu ka? What is this asking? It's asking among New York, Paris, and Tokyo, which place is the most beautiful or which place is the most pretty? So let's break this down. We have New York to Paris to Tokyo to. So we're listing all of the places that we want to compare. After that, again, we have dewa to mean among these. And then we have the word here that changes. We have doko now instead of donata or dore or dare because we're comparing places. Right after that, we have the particle ga again to mark the subject of the sentence. We have ichiban kirei, which is the most pretty or the most beautiful because kirei means pretty or beautiful. Then to end the sentence, we have desuka to end the sentence and turn it into a question with ka. So altogether, New York to Paris to Tokyo to de wa doko ga ichiban kirei desu ka? As among New York, Paris, and Tokyo, which place is the most beautiful? So one pretty important thing to note here is that when we do such a thing in English, we're comparing places, sometimes we'll still use the word which instead of where. We'll say, between New York and Paris, which one do you want to go to more? You could also say, between New York and Paris, where do you want to go to more? But in Japanese, the same dynamic doesn't exist. Dore is pretty much which here, but we don't use dore when we're using locations. We are simply going to stick to doko. So that's a little language difference right there. Okay, so that's how we compare more than two different entities, and that grammar construct should be enough to get you by in most cases, but there is one more thing that we should consider. We are now going to cover how to compare objects or entities within a similar group, as in a category. So for instance, what if I wanted to say, among anime, which show is the most interesting? I don't want to list every single anime in existence in order to let this person answer my question. I just want to give him or her the basic category that I'm talking about, which is anime, and telling him to choose from that category, not from a list of listed entities. So to do that, the grammar construct that we're going to use is X no naka de blanku ga ichiban A desu ka. So the variable X here is going to be the category that I'm choosing, which is going to be anime if we were talking about the last example. For the blank, again, we have that word that is going to be dependent on what we're talking about. If we're talking about people, places, or just things in general, we use different words. And the last variable in our grammar construct here is A, which is just going to be basically the descriptor. The most what? The most fun, the most interesting, the most longest. And yeah. So one more thing to note before we move into an example here is that for this grammar construct, we are no longer going to use the word dore when comparing things. Instead, we're going to replace that with nani. And basically the reason behind that is because the word dore translates to which. And we can't use which when we don't have a list provided for the person to pick things from. If we're just providing a category, we can't say which because there's nothing to choose from. We use instead nani, which is what. So you're picking what from that category, but you're not picking which from a provided list because there is no such provided list. And that is pretty different from English because in English you can still use the word which in that sense. You can say, if we're talking about anime, which one is your favorite? Well, for whatever reason, that's not going to fly in the Japanese language, so do remember to switch from dore to nani in this grammar construct. So let's move on to an example now. For our first one, we have anime no naka de nani ga ichiban omoshiroi desu ka? So what this basically translates to is, in anime, what or which is the most interesting? Let's break down the sentence. First up, we have anime. After that, we have no naka de, and this basically means inside of the thing that was just mentioned, so it's going to be inside of anime. So in anime. After that, we have nani ga ichiban omoshiroi desu ka? And we know more than half of the meaning of this part just from what we've covered earlier. Nani ga ichiban omoshiroi desu ka is just going to be is the most interesting with a question mark. And here now, instead of dore or dare or donata or doko, we have nani, which is basically just what. And that word itself is probably more common than all those other ones. So altogether, that second half of the sentence is going to be what is the most interesting. So we combine that with the first part of the sentence, and altogether we have in anime, what is the most interesting, or to phrase that more naturally, among anime, which one is the most interesting? And while in this grammar construct, dore is replaced by nani, all of the other words that we would use depending on the entities that we're comparing, donata, dare, and doko, those are going to retain their original use. You don't replace that with nani. Now for our next example, we have kandi no naka de nani ga ichiban suki desu ka? And this is basically just asking, in candy or among candy, what is your favorite? If we're going to phrase that more naturally, it would just be something like, which candy do you like most? Or which candy is your favorite? So again, here, breaking it down, we see that kandi no naka de is just among candy or in candy. After that is pretty much the same exact thing as the last example. Nani ga ichiban suki desu ka? Nani ga is going to be what is. Ichiban is going to be the most or the best. Suki is to like, so ichiban suki is going to be the most liked by you. And then desu ka to end the sentence and turn into a question. So kanji no naka de nani ga ichiban suki desu ka is what is your favorite candy, pretty much. So there you go. That ends our long journey to learning how to compare different entities to different entities or more than two different entities. And now with these 3 grammar constructs available to you, you should be able to compare all you want. Go ahead, compare.